This is an introduction to Ancestral Sources by me, Nick Walker, the Ancestral Sources developer. Ancestral Sources is a companion product to the Family Historian genealogy software from Calico. It was developed by me and is used by hundreds of family historian users. It was first released in 2010, but based on an earlier program I developed in 2004. It pioneered a source-driven approach to entering data into Family Historian. Most of the information that we add comes from one of the few types, such as birth, marriage, death certificates, church baptisms, burials, marriages, and census records. So the concept of Ancestral Sources is it allows you to enter the data from those documents directly into the software, thus building up the family history data in a more intuitive approach than the usual methods used. So, for example, typically entering a census household entry in a family history program requires creating lots of facts like censuses and occupations and births, linked for each individual, all linked back to a source via lots of citations, which can be a very time-consuming exercise. But Ancestral Sources makes this easier and much quicker to achieve. So this video will demonstrate adding a census source to Family Historian using Ancestral Sources. It will demonstrate the creation of a generic source rather than a templated source. And just to mention that Family Historian 7 brought in the idea of templated sources, and they are fully supported by Ancestral Sources, but we'll describe those in another video. It will add an image to the census as a media file linked to the source, and it will generate multiple census, occupation and birth facts linked to the source. And it will also demonstrate the auto text feature in Ancestral Sources, which helps to rapidly create a source text transcription of the census. In Family Historian, I've loaded up the sample project and I've added a couple and 3 of their children, and I'll use them in my demonstration of Ancestral Sources in a moment. Both Ancestral Sources and Family Historian do work together very well, but they're using the same project file. So you do need to make sure that before you add any information using Ancestral Sources that you click Save within Family Historian. And some people like to be sort of doubly careful by just closing Family Historian while they use Ancestral Sources. There is also a plugin available that will run Ancestral Sources and make sure that the file is saved before it does so, but I'm not going to discuss that here. It's also worth saying that of course, there is always the danger that you'll add information wrongly to your file within Ancestral Sources. Ancestral Sources does make a backup of your file, but until you really know what you're doing and have made sure that you're happy with all the settings, I do recommend experimenting with Ancestral Sources with a copy of your project or with the sample project as I'm doing here. So I'm going to click Save, and then I'm going to move over to run Ancestral Sources. So I'm going to close this welcome screen, go up to File, Open Project, and choose the Family Historian Sample Project. Useful tip, I'm going to also go to File and then Make Current Project Default. And that means that this project will open up by default every time Ancestral Sources runs in the future. I have census as my current source type here, but I could equally create births, marriages, deaths, burials, etc. if I wanted to. But for this demo, I'm going to use census. The census source type actually has some subtypes. We can create electoral register entries and also the 1939 UK register, which is like a census. So we're going to do census. We're going to go for England and 1851, and you can see the date is already displayed there. And across the middle here, we now have the headings that we would expect to see on the 1851 census. And at the top, you can see that Ancestral Sources is going to create a new source. I could, if I wish, link a repository at this stage for the entry. I personally don't use repositories, but lots of people do. So you can link a repository and you can select an existing one, or you can create a new repository to record where you found this source. The title for the source begins to get built up as you enter in the data, and we're using the default title template within Ancestral Sources, but that's fully customizable. You can change that as you wish. We can then enter the place, the address, a reference ID, and some other information. And then over here I can select the people that I want to be recorded in this census entry. So the first thing that I'm going to do is add my image. So I'm going to go to Add View Images, and the image viewer pops up. And over here we can see that we have Link New Image highlighted. I could equally link an existing image that we already have in the file. So I'll link a new image, click on Select File, and now select the census image that I downloaded from a popular family history website. I'm going to maximize the screen now so we can see what's going on, and just narrow this panel over a little bit. So the image title, what this means is that the media record that's created in Family Historian will be given a particular title, and that uses an image template which is set in the Ancestral Sources options, and that title again will change as we enter information on the main screen. I like personally to have the option to rename the file to match the title. So that simply means that the file that's saved onto the computer will be renamed to have the same name as the media record within Family Historian. But again, that's an optional thing, you don't have to do that. So if I click Save, I then get this pop-up box here, and I'm going to say that yes, I do want to copy the image, and it will allow me to then decide where I want that image to be copied within the project. So I'm going to want the image to be copied into the 1851 folder that I've created, which is in the census folder within the media area of the project. If there wasn't a suitable folder for it, I could have created a new folder here to actually put that in. But I'm going to copy this one into the 1851 folder, click OK. It doesn't actually copy it there and then, nothing happens. It just knows that when we finally save our entry, that's where it will be copied to at that point. We can then click here to hide this panel. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take the screen out of the maximize, and I'm going to move my image, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that I can see the family here. You can see Samuel Appleton and his family that I'm interested in. And I'm going to just resize this so that it sort of fits just down here in the corner, because it's very handy to be able to see the data I'm entering in within the image while I'm entering it onto the main screen. And what I'll also do is click this always on top option here, which means that I can enter things into the main screen without the image viewer disappearing behind it. So looking at the top of this entry, I can see that the census takes place in Wiston in Lancashire. So I'm going to enter Wiston, Lancashire as the place. There isn't an address recorded for this family, so all we know is they're in Wiston. So I'm going to just leave the address blank. And now we're going to enter the reference ID, the citation ID. Now there's all sorts of different ways you might decide to record this. The citations are often sort of very clearly marked on websites such as Ancestry and Find My Past, etc. But what I'm going to do is look at this reference down this side here, which is HO 1072194. So I'm going to enter that. I'm going to use the page number, although I may sometimes use the folio number instead. People do things in different ways. So at the top there it's 31. And if you wish, you could also record the schedule number there as well, but I'm not going to do that. The other info box, by default in Ancestral Sources, I suggest we use that to name the person in the entry that you're kind of most identifying with. So very often that's the head of household, and so in this case I'm going to put in Samuel Appleton. But sometimes you may have your ancestor living as a lodger in a house, so they're not the head of household, but you may want to just put them down here so that it helps you to recognise that source in the future. And now actually we can see the title of this source that gets created will be, as shown there, Census 1851, Western Lancashire, with the reference, and Samuel Appleton in brackets. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm just creating a generic source here. I'm not taking advantage of the new templated sources that are available to us in Family Historian 7, and we will talk about that in another video. So now I'm going to focus on getting the information entered for this family. So the first person is Samuel Appleton. So up here in the find box, I'm going to type Appleton. There I can see Samuel, and when I click on him we can see over here some information about him. If he'd been involved in other censuses and we'd had those recorded, there'd be a list of those here, and we can also see his spouse and the children that he has as well. So if I click select, he now gets added to the grid on this side. Now the information that Ancestral Sources has sort of tried to guess, has filled in for us, is pretty accurate. He is 37. He was born in Prescott, Lancashire, but I'm just going to fill in his occupation as joiner. And next is his wife, Mary Ann. So I'm going to, I can click and select her, or just double click her, and she will then get added as well. Now we know a little bit less about her. She is also 37, so I can enter that in. She doesn't have an occupation, and her place of birth is Liverpool in Lancashire. So I'm going to enter that. So it's worth just saying at this point that we are entering data here that will get stored into facts within Family Historian. So if, for example, Samuel Appleton's occupation was recorded as an ag lab, I would have entered that as an agricultural labourer, because agricultural labourer is what I would expect to be recorded within the occupation. We'll be looking later at how we kind of transcribe this entry, where you might then leave it as ag lab. But at this stage, always be thinking about the format that you want the data to be recorded in within your file. So similarly with the where born column, I'm putting the place and then a comma and then the county. Some of you may wish to also put the country after that as well, but because predominantly my family history is all in the UK, I don't tend to worry about that too much unless they have gone abroad. You'll also see here the name is Mary Ann Oldham. As usual in family history, we use a woman's birth name as her identifier, but we'll see again when we look at the transcription, we'll be able to definitely record her as being Mary Ann Appleton, which is what her name is in the census record. Right, we're now going to add a child, Thomas. Now, I happen to know that Mary Ann had Thomas as an illegitimate child before she married Samuel, so I'm going to add Thomas there. So again, it says Thomas Oldham because that's his birth name, but in the actual census record it is Thomas Appleton, but we'll worry about that in a minute. So the relation there is son. He isn't 18 in this census, he's recorded as being 17, and his occupation is a painter, and his place of birth is Prescott, and so are all of their children. Next up is Joseph, and he is recorded as being 15 and a scholar. And then we've got Peter. Now Peter isn't one of the children that we've come across before, so we're going to add him as a child by clicking on this Add Child link down here. And he's a child of Samuel and Mary, and so I'm going to put Peter in, he's male, click OK, and he now gets added as well. And at this point he is 9, and he's also a scholar. As soon as I type S for scholar, it will automatically fill it in because it's guessing it's another scholar based on the occupation above. And as soon as I type P, it assumes it's Prescott. So all these things are real time savers. Next we've got Mary Alice. We know about her, so she can be added, and she is indeed 7, and she is also a scholar. And then we've got 2 children, John and Samuel, who we've not come across before, so I'm going to add both of those as children, and I'll just do that now. So I'm going to add John, and while I'm at it, I will also add Samuel. So they have now both been added to the entry, and I'm just going to tidy up the missing facts about them. So John is 5, and he is also a scholar, and he's also from Prescott. And Samuel, I'm going to click the 3 dots here, and so he is 8 months of age. Or I could have just typed 8M here. He doesn't have an occupation recorded, and he's also from Prescott. So we've now entered in the information that we required. Now at this stage I'm just going to make a couple of changes to some options. So up on the Tools menu here we have Ancestral Sources options, and I really recommend that you spend a lot of time going through these settings and making sure that they are in line with what you would like to happen within your project. So for example over here I haven't got templated sources ticked, so I'm not using that. Down here I have hyperlink to individual records ticked, and that means that when we create our transcription of the source in a moment, we're going to have hyperlinks for each of the individuals. That means in Family Historian I'll be able to click on those individuals to go straight to their record, and that's a really nice feature that I really like in Family Historian 7. A setting that I am going to use is within the census settings, and you can see there are lots of settings for all of the different types. So the one I'm going to set is for birth facts, offer to create birth facts, and then tick even if existing birth includes place and date. So we'll see what that does in a minute or two. Right, so I'm going to now just move this up and out of the way. So we have down here a big white box and another big white box down here. This white box here is for entering the source text, which is where you can record a transcription of the source record, in this case a census record. And down here are any notes that you might need to make, perhaps noting that they live next door to somebody else, or it was difficult to read the entry, or something like that. I'm not going to use the note in this case, so I'm just going to move that out of the way. Now, we could just type in our copy of this census entry, this transcription, but Ancestral Sources has some very useful tools to help you with this. And the facility we're going to be looking at is called Auto Text. If I click this Auto button here, it produces a list of auto text templates. Now, if this was a marriage, we'd see a whole list here of different templates for all the different types of marriage certificates, etc., that you might come across. But for census, there really is, in Ancestral Sources, only one default template, but it comes in a rich text or a plain text variety. So the R means that it's rich text, and that means that we can use things like bold and tables and colours and that kind of thing. So if I click on that, Ancestral Sources will now, using the auto text, generate its best guess at transcription. The first really useful thing perhaps to look at is that I can click the Fit button here, and that narrows the columns in the grid above so that it doesn't take up as much space. Now, at this stage, what we're trying to do is create a transcription of the original source. Now, really, again, this is all about our own personal preferences. I don't feel particularly that I need to edit, say, the word Lancashire here to say ditto instead. I don't really think it makes a lot of difference to the transcription to be that accurate. Again, here it says Lancashire Prescott, but here it's Prescott Lancashire, and again, I don't really think it's going to make any difference to my record if I leave those as they are. But sometimes, if, for example, like I said earlier, if it had Ag Lab here, I might well make sure that says Ag Lab rather than agricultural labourer. Work on your own preferences to decide how you want to handle that. Now, you can see that Ancestral Sources has automatically recorded Mary Ann Appleton rather than Mary Ann Oldham, but it doesn't know that Thomas Oldham is actually referred to as Thomas Appleton in this record. Now, you can see these are hyperlinked, they're underlined because of the option that I mentioned earlier. And if I double click on that, I get a box here where I can edit that. So he is actually Thomas Appleton. So that will be there. And I could make other changes as required within the text here to make the transcription as accurate as I'd like it to be. Right, so I think I've finished entering all the data now. So I'm going to click the Save button up here. And what we get now is a pop-up box to ask us about creating birth facts. Now, because we've put in ages of the individuals here and places of birth, Ancestral Sources will, if we want it to, create birth facts for the individuals. So for Samuel Appleton here, we already knew his date of birth and where he was born, and so really the census doesn't give us anything more accurate than that. So I'm not going to change the birth event, but I'm going to add a citation for it because this census does give us information about that birth. Some users of Ancestral Sources like to create multiple birth facts, so individuals have more than one birth recorded for every time they find them in any source. And there are, again, options in Ancestral Sources if you wish to do that, but personally I like to just have one birth fact for an individual. If I click Next, we go on to Mary Ann. She had no birth details recorded before, but we now have a calculated date of 1813 based on her age and the place of birth. So I'm going to create a birth event for her. Thomas Oldham, we already had lots of information about him, so I'll just add a citation for him. Joseph, we already had more information about him, so I'll just add a citation. We knew nothing about Peter, so we'll create a birth event. We won't change Mary Alice, but we will add a citation. We knew nothing about John, and we knew nothing about Samuel. So now we'll click Finish. And it's now asking us, do we want to retain the place, the reference, the other information for use in the next census entry. So if we happen to be creating more than one record, perhaps doing the next household on the street, we might want to keep the same reference there. If we don't want that, just click cancel and it just loads up, ready to enter the next record. So now let's go over to Family Historian and see what changes have occurred there. Now in Family Historian, it's spotted that the file has been modified and asks if I want to reload it, and of course I do, so I click yes, and we can now see Samuel and Mary and some of their new children are there. We can see, for example, Peter and John have got calculated dates of birth. If I click on Peter, we can see in the facts here that he's got a birth record, he's got a census record recording his age, and he's also got an occupation record showing that he was a scholar. There is actually an option within Ancestral Sources to not record scholar as an occupation if you don't consider that to be an occupation, but I didn't put that setting on. Each of those three facts there for Peter all have a citation back to a source, which we'll see in a moment, and each of the children will equally have the facts which are all linked back to that source. So we've created multiple facts there. If we have a look at that source, we can see that it's got the title, the fact that it's a census type, and there's our census reference as well. In the text from source, we have the transcription that we created, and in the media we can see it's linked to a media record which is linked to the file that we linked as well. And here you can see that, for example, if I click on Joseph, because these are hyperlinks, it will take me straight to Joseph's record here. If I click on Mary Ann, it takes me straight to Mary Ann's record there as well. So I'm hoping you can see there how useful Ancestral Sources is. Obviously I ran through it quite slowly because I was explaining it to you, but typically you can add a census entry like this in just a few minutes, and it just saves so much more time over entering all those multiple facts and sources and images, etc. Into Family Historian. I want to just mention that Ancestral Sources creates a folder called Ancestral Sources within your Documents folder, and within there it keeps settings and logs, but also it creates a backup each time you save the file in Ancestral Sources of the version before it saves it. So if things ever do go wrong, and I don't think they should, you do always have a backup there, as well as the usual backups that you'll be using yourself on your computers, and also the Family Historian backups too. The home of Ancestral Sources is the Family Historian User Group website at fhug.org.uk. There is an Ancestral Sources forum on there, and if you go to the knowledge base, then click on Ancestral Sources over here on the right hand side. You can read more about Ancestral Sources there and also gain access to the downloads page.